here to speak out against the narrow-minded vision of some of the entrepreneurs of the businesses of the Berkshires. Why, if you listen to them, you would believe that if there was no Tanglewood, there would be no tourists. I say no way. If you watch the clips that follow this introduction, you will see a story that is told regarding architecture, setting, scenery, nature, history, everything that is not seasonally attached. Anybody who has this narrow vision is missing a big opportunity. That is, bringing tours through to see all of the wonders. Whether Tanglewood is having concerts or not, the buildings, the buildings and the stories remain true. So watch the following clips and imagine these tours and the offers if you really introduce them to the people and whether or not they're going to go for it. That's recording. Okay, hold it there so you see that gorgeous house. I'm going to hold it there. That's it. Here we are at Elm Court in Lenox. This beautiful Gilded Age mansion, as you see the shingle style, was the home of Emily Vanderbilt. And this home was designed by the architectural firm of Peabody and Stern. And in this house, Emily Vanderbilt lived with her husband, the esteemed ambassador Theodore White. And together in these rooms, in the company of Winston Churchill and Woodrow Wilson, the President of the United States, following the end of World War I, they devised the treaty which they would go to Versailles and make sure that the peace was secured, but also brought about the beginning of World War II. And end that like this. Years ago today, the world is at war. But here in Lenox, society went on as usual, with one sort of interesting difference. Society in Lenox was the only place where the British, the French, the Italians all could get together and socialize with the Austro-Hungarians and other people who were basically waging war and killing each other in unheard of numbers overseas. Because of that, there was a lot of spying going on among the upper classes, and here in Lenox, that certainly was the case. Now behind me is the home of the Field family. But not 100 years ago, this house was rented out to the ambassador from Austria-Hungary. And he and his wife were persuaded to come to Lenox by Marguerite Vanderbilt, who had earlier met them at Manchester by the Sea, their previous choice of places to stay. But Marguerite suggested that the Dumas, the ambassadors, came to Lenox because the society was so good. Well, Marguerite's husband was Alfred Gwynn Vanderbilt, and he was gonna die on the Lusitania, but that's not until 1915. In the meantime, the Austrian-Hungarian ambassador is definitely trying to support his side of the story while he's taking a sojourn here in Lenox.
We're on the left. Yep.
Yeah, and I said, we'll just make it and put it on the ice.
The antecedents of the resort is the Reverend Henry Ward Beecher. During his lifetime, he was one of the most famous men in America. He was a preacher, an evangelist, a man whose word carried some weight all around the world. But he fell into these problems, we should say, and he got involved with a woman who was not his wife, and he was married. Now his sister was Harriet Beecher Stowe, who had made a name for herself for writing Uncle Tom's Cabin. She certainly stood up for him through all of his travails. He had decided to build an estate in Lenox and make a go of it as a farmer, but he failed in that endeavor as he failed in so many other endeavors. His beautiful land became desirable when the Gilded Age bloomed on America, and the Sloan family, up-and-comers in New York, having run a very successful mercantile company which specialized in the sale of carpentry. Now, in Lenox, the arrival of such upstarts upset the Sedgwick family, who had resettled in Lenox from Stockbridge. And one of the Sedgwicks was known to complain, "Don't tell me you're going to associate with that carpet merchant family." That carpet merchant family was friends with presidents and all of the top 400 families that loomed out during the Gilded Age. They married very well into the Vanderbilt family, and one of the Sloans married Emily Vanderbilt, leaving her a widow for her second marriage, celebrated at the scene Ambassador Theater White. But it was the Sloan money and the Sloan connection that did build Empire. Stockbridge is rightly proud of its main street, which was captured so beautifully in the painting by Norman Rockwell and is now in the Rockwell Museum, a testament to 10 years of observing the street, which really never changes. Stockbridge is also mentioned in the song Alice's Restaurant, which was such a hit during the 1960s. And then again, it lives forever in James Taylor's famous song, Sweet Baby James, when they mention the town of Stockbridge as the beginning of the turnpike, which ends in Boston. When he writes famously, the 1st of December was covered with snow, and so was the turnpike from Stockbridge to Boston. However, I am about to relate a tale about this famous main street and the time in which the Nazi flag was paraded down it. The only time in the history of the United States that the Nazi flag was used to represent the country of Germany. The event takes place on Memorial Day in 1936. Time magazine. In the green Berkshire Hills of Massachusetts nestle a knot of towns: Lenox, Lee, Stockbridge, Lee, Great Barrington, whose natives are hard-headed Yankees, whose summer colonists are sedate, aristocratic New Englanders and Manhattanites. Two of the swankiest, most comfortable hotels in the neighborhood are Heaton Hall and the Red Lion Inn at Stockbridge, both owned by Massachusetts' benign, broad-beamed Republican Representative Allen Towner Treadway, manager of the Red Lion Inn, and also his Yale-educated son, Heaton Ives Treadway, who runs the winter hotels in Pinehurst, North Carolina, and Florida. In Florida last winter, Heaton Treadway met some members of Dr. Frank Nathan Daniel Buckman's Oxford groups, well aware of how those earnest evangelicals attract the upper classes. He was quick to suggest Stockbridge, Massachusetts, as the perfect setting for the Oxford group's first National Assembly. Now, the Oxford group had gained considerable influence in Europe by attracting the upper classes of Germany and also Heinrich Himmler. And Dr. Buckman was a guest of Mr. Himmler at the Olympics in 1936 and featured prominently in the propaganda films of that era in order to uplift the Third Reich. Now, pause. Among the Oxford group's most important adherents in the United States were the Firestones and their good friends, Henry Ford Jr. and his self-effacing wife, who just happened to take a private carriage into Stockbridge and attend most of the luncheons and lectures of the First National Assembly. Now, local Yankees were divided as to whether the Buckmanites practiced free love or were socialists. But by the time the 10-day assembly ended last week, the rest of the U.S. could gain an honest, unrestrained view of its zealous activities from its newsreels, wire services, and the Eastern press, which gave it publicity comparable to that which the Oxford group has received in Europe. Welcomed because an Oxford group tenet is to spread the message of God control as widely as possible. The publicity emphasized the adroit stageness of the assembly, the newsworthiness of the names identified with it, the singular nature of the testimony by which Oxford group ideas were proffered to those who cared to listen. On Memorial Day, an airplane roared over New England, trailing a banner inscribed, "America Awake." The Oxford group, Stockbridge, with the local post and the American Legion, the groupers paraded, held a meeting in front of the Stockbridge Town Hall. The leader of the parade, in a dirty, beatered leather jacket, was an Indian chief named Umpatas, billed as a Stockbridge or Mohican Indian who had ended up on a reservation in Wisconsin. He there turned to God and away from civilization and education, which he told the meeting didn't make an Indian or anybody else any better. Marchers in the parade carried the flags of the 48 states and 18 nations, including Germany's swastika. Adverse comment on which was parried with the statement that thus does the Oxford group bring nations together.